The chains bit into Mira Lawson's wrists before she even heard the key turn in the cellar door, and in that instant she understood that her father's debts had finally swallowed her whole. The wedding dress pooled around her knees, stained with wine someone had thrown during the reception she couldn't remember attending. Everything from the moment she'd signed the papers felt distant, muffled, like watching herself through frosted glass. Her father had wept. The officiant had stammered through vows she hadn't chosen, and Marcus Pemberton, the debt lord who'd bought her marriage contract along with her father's gambling markers, had smiled with teeth that promised nothing good. The cellar smelled of salt and old wood. Somewhere above, the wedding reception continued without the bride. She could hear music, laughter, the clink of glasses celebrating a union that existed only on paper, and in the eyes of whatever old law allowed a man to purchase another person's daughter like livestock. Mira tested the chains. Heavy iron, bolted to the stone wall. Her wrists were already raw. She'd tried to run that morning, made it 3 blocks before Pemberton's men caught her, dragged her back, forced the dress over her head while she fought and screamed. No one had intervened. In this part of the port city, in the shadow of the old customs houses, people knew better than to interfere with the business of men who dealt in contracts written in blood and desperation. The door at the top of the stairs exploded inward, not opened, exploded. The thick oak tore from its hinges and clattered down the steps, followed by a silence so complete Mira forgot to breathe. Then he appeared. White hair fell past his shoulders, luminous in the dim light filtering down from above. His skin held the same pale perfection as though carved from moonstone. He wore black, tailored and expensive, and when he descended the stairs, his movements held a fluid grace that made her think of predators, of apex creatures who'd never known fear. His eyes found her immediately. They were dark, nearly black, and ancient in a way that had nothing to do with the smooth planes of his face. "Who are you?" His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, something old-world and commanding. Mira's mouth had gone dry. She knew what he was. Everyone in the port district knew about the vampires who ran the shadow economies, who held court in the renovated customs houses and enforced laws older than the city itself. But she'd never seen one, never expected to. "Mira," she managed. "Mira Lawson." He stared at her for a long moment, taking in the chains, the dress, the bruises forming on her arms where Pemberton's men had gripped too hard. Something shifted in his expression, a storm gathering behind carefully controlled features. "Where is Pemberton?" "Upstairs, at the reception." The words tasted bitter. "Our wedding reception." The vampire moved closer, and Mira forced herself not to flinch. He knelt before her, examining the chains with a focus that made her feel both visible and protected in equal measure. This close, she could see the perfect symmetry of his features, the way candlelight played across skin that seemed to glow from within. "These chains," he said quietly, "were not part of any marriage I would recognize. Pemberton said I tried to run, said I needed to learn my place." The vampire's jaw tightened. He reached out and Mira braced herself, but his touch was gentle as he turned her wrist to examine the raw skin beneath the iron cuffs. His fingers were cool, steady. "My name is Raith Iskander," he said, still studying the chains. "I am king of the Northern Coven, and I came here tonight to collect a tax your new husband has owed for the better part of a decade." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I did not come expecting to find a woman in irons." "He owns me." The words hurt to say aloud. "My father lost everything gambling. Pemberton bought the debts, bought the marriage contract. It's legal. Old law, but legal." Raith's expression darkened. Legal and just are not always synonymous. He stood, and before Mira could ask what he intended, he grasped the chains with both hands. His arms flexed once, and the iron links shattered like glass. The sound echoed through the cellar, sharp and final. Mira stared at her freed hands, at the broken chains dangling from the wall. Her wrists throbbed, but the weight was gone. The constant pull against her bones had vanished. "You freed me." Her voice came out small, disbelieving. "I did." Raith offered his hand. "Can you stand?" She took it, let him pull her to her feet. The dress tangled around her ankles and she stumbled, but he caught her easily, one arm steadying her waist. "Thank you," Mira breathed. "I don't know how to repay. I require no payment for basic decency." His tone held an edge of anger, though she sensed instinctively it wasn't directed at her. "What I would request, however, is something entirely different." She looked up at him, confused. Raith's expression softened slightly, some of the storm clearing from his dark eyes. "When you are ready, not tonight, not until you've had time to recover from this nightmare, I would like to take you to dinner. A proper date, one where you choose to attend." Mira felt her breath catch. Of all the things she'd expected from a vampire king, this wasn't among them. He'd freed her. He could have commanded anything, demanded any payment. Instead, he was asking, giving her a choice. Why? "Because in the 300 years I've walked this earth, I've rarely encountered anyone who faced their circumstances with such quiet strength." His hand remained at her waist, steadying but not confining. "And because I would very much like to know you as a free woman, unbound and unbroken." Above them, footsteps thundered, voices raised in alarm. "My king?" A woman appeared at the top of the stairs, also white-haired, also beautiful in that otherworldly way. "Pemberton has realized what you've done. He's gathering his men." Raith didn't look away from Mira. "Then he can gather them. I'm taking Miss Lawson with me." "You can't," Mira said, even as hope flared in her chest. "The contract is a matter for the courts." Raith finally released her, though his attention remained focused and absolute. "But first, I'm removing you from immediate danger. Everything else we'll address properly." He shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders, hiding the ruined wedding dress. The fabric held his scent, something dark and spiced, and warmth from his body. Marcus Pemberton burst through the doorway, red-faced and furious, with 6 men crowding behind him. He was older, thick around the middle, with the kind of entitled rage that came from years of buying his way out of consequences. That's my wife," he snarled at Raith. "You have no right." "I have every right." Raith's voice could have frozen blood. "As king of this territory, I have the right to intervene in any matter involving abuse or unlawful imprisonment. As a citizen of this city, I have the right to protect someone in immediate danger." He stepped between Mira and Pemberton, a wall of controlled menace. "And as a creature of considerable age and even more considerable patience, I strongly suggest you don't test me further tonight." Pemberton's face purpled, but he didn't advance. His men shifted nervously behind him. The contract is legal," Pemberton spat. "Witnessed and signed. She belongs to me." "Then petition the tribunal." Raith's tone turned silky, dangerous. "Make your case before the vampire courts. We'll examine your contract, your treatment of your alleged wife, and the circumstances under which she came to be chained in your cellar on your wedding night." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm certain that hearing will go splendidly for you." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Pemberton's jaw worked, but finally he stepped back. "You'll regret this, Iskander." "Unlikely." Raith turned, offering Mira his arm. "Miss Lawson." She took it, legs trembling, and let him guide her up the stairs. Pemberton's men parted before them like water. The woman who'd warned Raith fell into step behind them, along with 2 others who appeared from shadows, all of them radiating the same predatory grace. They passed through the house, through the reception hall, where guests still drank and laughed, oblivious to the drama below. Mira kept her eyes forward, chin up, even as whispers started to follow in their wake. Outside, the night air tasted like freedom. A car waited at the curb, sleek and black. Raith opened the door himself, helped Mira inside, then settled beside her. "Where are we going?" she asked as they pulled away from Pemberton's house. "Somewhere safe." He studied her face in the passing streetlights. "I have apartments throughout the city. You'll stay in one tonight with guards, and tomorrow we'll begin sorting this mess properly." Mira closed her eyes, let her head fall back against the leather seat. Everything felt surreal. Hours ago she'd been trapped, bound, with no hope of escape. Now she sat beside a vampire king who'd torn through iron chains and faced down her captor with nothing but his presence. "Why do you care?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "About me, I mean. You don't know me." Raith was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice held a gentleness she hadn't expected. "I've lived a very long time, Mira. Long enough to recognize when someone is drowning and when they're fighting to swim." "You were fighting." He paused. And perhaps because I remember what it's like to have every choice stripped away, to be treated as property rather than a person. She opened her eyes, looked at him. Vampires can be enslaved? Long ago, before I became what I am now, I was human. His gaze remained fixed on the window, on the city sliding past. And humans, as you well know, are capable of enslaving anyone they perceive as weaker. The apartment was in one of the old customs houses, the building's Gothic facade restored to gleaming perfection. Inside, modern luxury blended seamlessly with historical architecture, soaring ceilings, crown molding, contemporary furniture in rich fabrics. Raith showed her to a bedroom that was larger than her father's entire apartment. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, dressed in white linens that looked impossibly soft. "There are clothes in the closet," he said, gesturing. "They should fit reasonably well. The bathroom is through there. Take whatever time you need." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'll be in my study if you need anything. Just ask one of the guards to fetch me." "Raith." He turned back and she struggled to find words adequate for what he'd done. "Thank you. For everything. For asking." Understanding flickered in his dark eyes. "You're welcome. Rest now. Tomorrow we'll plan our next steps." When the door closed behind him, Mira finally let herself collapse onto the bed. The dress tangled around her legs and she fought free of it, kicked the white satin away with more force than necessary. In the closet she found soft clothes, comfortable and well made. She showered until her skin turned pink, scrubbing away the memory of Pemberton's house, of the cellar, of hands that had forced her into white lace and false promises. That night she dreamed of chains breaking and white hair gleaming in candlelight. Morning came with weak sunlight filtering through heavy curtains. Mira woke disoriented, taking a moment to remember where she was. Safe. She was safe. A knock at the door preceded a young woman entering with a breakfast tray. Human, Mira noted with some relief, though the woman moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to working among vampires. "Mr. Iskander asked me to bring this up," she said with a warm smile. "He's in meetings this morning, but wanted me to tell you he'll be back this afternoon. You're welcome to explore the apartment, or there's a library down the hall if you'd like." Mira thanked her, ate mechanically, then spent the morning curled in the library with a book she couldn't focus on. Her mind kept returning to Raith, to the way he'd looked at her in that cellar, like she mattered, like her choice mattered. She'd been engaged once before, years ago, to a boy from her neighborhood. Sweet and nervous, he'd asked her father's permission, then asked her with flowers and stuttering hope. She'd said yes because she wanted to, because she loved him. Then her father's gambling had started in earnest, the debts had piled up, and her fiancé had disappeared rather than tie himself to her family's sinking ship. She hadn't blamed him, not really, but it had taught her that love was a luxury for people whose lives weren't collateral. Raith returned in the afternoon, still dressed impeccably, though she noticed tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there the night before. "How are you?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Confused," Mira admitted. "Yesterday I was property. Today I'm in a vampire king's library drinking expensive coffee. It's a lot to process." A slight curve touched his mouth, not quite a smile, but close. "Fair enough." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I spent the morning with my legal advisors. Pemberton has already filed a petition with the tribunal, as expected. He's claiming breach of contract and demanding your return." Fear spiked through her. "Can he—" "No." Raith's tone left no room for doubt. "But we need to do this properly. The vampire courts operate on very specific rules, and if I simply ignore his petition, it sets a dangerous precedent. Other debt lords would see it as tyranny, as me placing myself above the law." His jaw tightened. "I need to beat him within the system, not around it." Mira absorbed this, understanding the politics, even if she hated them. "What do you need from me?" "Your testimony. Your truth." He held her gaze. "The tribunal will convene in 3 days. You'll need to appear, to tell them exactly what happened, how you came to sign that contract, what Pemberton did, why you tried to run. And if they rule in his favor? They won't." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "But even if they tried, I would find another way. I didn't free you just to let some corrupt bureaucrat chain you again." The fierceness in his expression made something warm unfurl in Mira's chest. Dangerous, that warmth. She couldn't afford to trust it, to trust him, not when everyone else in her life had proven so unreliable. "Why did you really free me?" she asked quietly. "The truth." Raith considered her for a long moment. "Because I've spent 3 centuries watching humans trade each other like commodities, and I'm tired of it. Because you deserved better than what was happening to you. And because—" He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. "Because when I saw you in that cellar, something in me recognized something in you. I don't have a better explanation than that." Honesty, raw and unadorned. Mira felt her defenses crack slightly. "Okay? Okay? Okay, I'll testify. I'll do whatever needs to be done to make this right." She drew a breath. "And when this is over, when I'm actually free, and not just borrowed from one man by another, I'll have dinner with you." The smile that transformed his face was worth every risk she was taking. "I look forward to it." The next 3 days passed in a strange suspension between terror and something that felt dangerously close to contentment. Raith's advisors prepped her for the tribunal, walking her through what questions to expect, how to answer clearly and truthfully. Raith himself visited daily, sometimes discussing the case, sometimes just sitting in the library while she read, a quiet presence that steadied her. He brought her favorite coffee without being told what it was, somehow having learned she took it with cream and too much sugar. He noticed when she favored her left wrist, the one that had borne more of the chain's weight, and appeared with a healer who treated the lingering ache with herbs and gentle magic. He never touched her without permission, never stood too close, always gave her space to breathe. And slowly, against every bit of self-preservation she possessed, Mira felt herself falling. She tried to logic her way out of it. He was a vampire king. She was human, mortal, with nothing to offer someone who'd lived 3 centuries. He was helping her because it was the right thing to do, not because he felt anything beyond basic compassion. The attraction she felt was just gratitude mixed with relief and proximity. But then he'd look at her, really look at her, and she'd see something in his dark eyes that had nothing to do with compassion and everything to do with want, with fascination, with a tenderness that made her heart race. The night before the tribunal, he found her on the apartment's balcony, staring out at the port city's lights. "Can't sleep?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "Too nervous," she glanced at him. "What happens if I mess up tomorrow? If I say the wrong thing?" "You won't." He stood close enough that she could feel the coolness radiating from him, a contrast to the warm night air. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Mira." "I don't feel strong. I feel terrified." "Strength and fear aren't mutually exclusive." He shifted slightly, angling toward her. "I'll be there tomorrow, in the gallery. You won't be alone." She knew he couldn't intervene directly, that the tribunal had rules about influence and interference, but knowing he'd be there, watching, supporting her, helped more than she wanted to admit. "Can I ask you something personal?" The question emerged before she could reconsider it. "Of course." "Have you ever been in love?" Raith went very still. When he finally answered, his voice held layers of old grief. "Once, a very long time ago when I was still human. She died of plague before I could marry her." He paused. "After I was turned, I told myself I'd never feel that way again. That immortality and love were incompatible, that caring too deeply for mortals would only lead to endless loss. And now?" He turned to look at her fully, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. "Now I'm beginning to think I was wrong, that some connections are worth the inevitable pain, that some people are worth any risk." The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken things. Mira's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm falling for you," she heard herself say. "I know I shouldn't. I know it's probably just gratitude or trauma bonding or something equally unhealthy, but I needed to say it out loud, just once." Raith reached out slowly, telegraphing his intent, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, cool and gentle. "It's not just gratitude," he said softly. "I've been falling for you since that first night, since I saw you facing down your nightmare with nothing but fierce determination." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But I won't ask anything of you until this is truly over, until you're free to choose without any shadow of obligation or debt." That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. His laugh was quiet, warm. "Then the men you've known have been fools." She leaned into his touch, let herself have this moment of connection before tomorrow's uncertainty. They stood like that for a long while, the city spreading out below them, the night wrapping them in temporary peace. The tribunal convened in what had once been the Grand Customs Hall, a soaring space of marble columns and vaulted ceilings, now serving as the vampire courts. Mira entered flanked by Raith's advisors, acutely aware of the dozens of pale, perfect faces watching from the gallery. The vampires who filled the seats ranged from young to ancient, all of them radiating power and predatory grace. She found Raith immediately, seated in the front row. He met her eyes, nodded once, and that simple acknowledgement gave her courage. Pemberton sat at the petitioner's table, looking smug beside his own lawyer. The sight of him made Mira's skin crawl, but she forced herself to sit straight, to look unafraid. The tribunal consisted of 5 elder vampires, each one pale-haired and regal. The center judge, a woman who introduced herself as Magistrate Severin, called the proceedings to order with a voice that carried effortless authority. Marfas. Marcus Pemberton, Severin said, you petition this court to enforce a marriage contract with Mira Lawson and demand her return to your custody. State your case. Pemberton's lawyer stood, launching into a practice speech about legal contracts, witnessed agreements, and the sanctity of debt repayment through marriage bonds. He made it sound reasonable, traditional, like Mira had entered into the arrangement with full knowledge and consent. Then it was the defense's turn. Raith's lead advisor, a sharp-eyed vampire named Cassia, methodically tore apart Pemberton's case. She presented evidence of the gambling debts, of the coercion Mira's father had faced, of Pemberton's reputation for purchasing contracts from desperate families. She painted a picture of systematic exploitation that made several tribunal members lean forward with interest. Finally, they called Mira to testify. She walked to the witness stand on legs that trembled only slightly. Severin watched her with inscrutable dark eyes. Miss Lawson, the magistrate said, tell us in your own words how you came to sign this marriage contract. Mira took a breath, found Raith's face in the crowd, and began. She told them everything, how her father had gambled away their apartment, their savings, everything they owned, how Pemberton had appeared with papers and promises, offering to clear the debts in exchange for marriage, how her father had begged her, crying, saying it was their only option, how she'd been 19 and terrified and convinced she had no choice. Did you want to marry him? Severin asked. No, the word came out clear, firm. I didn't want to marry anyone. I wanted to finish school. I wanted a life that was mine. Then why sign? Because I thought I had to. Because my father was sick with guilt and fear, and I couldn't watch him destroy himself. Because Pemberton said if I didn't sign, he'd have my father arrested for fraud. Mira's hands clenched in her lap. So I signed, and I regretted it every day for 3 years while Pemberton delayed the wedding, stringing out the contract, using it to control me. The tribunal asked more questions. About the wedding, about the chains, about why she'd tried to run. Mira answered each one truthfully, her voice gaining strength as she went. When Pemberton's lawyer cross-examined her, trying to paint her as ungrateful and manipulative, she held her ground. And when he asked if she'd run away with Raith because she was sleeping with him, she met his eyes and said, I went with Raith Iskander because he freed me from chains and offered me a choice, something you and your client have never done. The gallery erupted in murmurs. After hours of testimony and arguments, Severin called for a recess. The tribunal would deliberate and return with a decision. Mira found Raith outside the courtroom. He took one look at her face and pulled her into a small antechamber, away from curious eyes. You are magnificent, he said quietly. I don't feel magnificent. I feel like I'm going to throw up. He caught her hands, held them carefully. Oh, whatever happens, I'll handle it. You have my word. She believed him, which was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. An hour later, they reconvened. Magistrate Severin surveyed the court, her expression grave. This tribunal has reached a decision. Her voice cut through the anxious silence. We find the marriage contract between Marcus Pemberton and Mira Lawson to be fundamentally void. Pemberton shot to his feet. You can't. Silence. The single word from Severin carried such authority that Pemberton dropped back into his chair. The contract was signed under duress, with coercion applied to both Miss Lawson and her father, Furthermore, Mr. Pemberton's treatment of Miss Lawson, specifically his decision to chain her on their wedding night, constitutes abuse that violates even the most permissive interpretation of marriage law. Severin lifted a document, and Mira recognized her marriage contract. The magistrate held it up for all to see, then deliberately tore it in half. The contract is voided. The marriage is annulled. Mira Lawson is declared a free citizen with no obligations to Marcus Pemberton. Severin's gaze fixed on Pemberton with cold distaste. Additionally, you are fined for abuse of legal process and barred from purchasing any further marriage contracts within this territory. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell with a sound like thunder. Mira stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Free. She was free. Actually, legally, completely free. Raith appeared at her side, his hand gentle on her lower back. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you out of here." They left the customs house through a side exit, avoiding the crowd and the inevitable questions. Raith's car waited in a private courtyard, and they slipped inside, into blessed quiet. "It's over," Mira breathed. "It's really over." "It's over." Raith watched her with something that looked like relief. "You're free, Mira. The contract is destroyed. Pemberton can't touch you." She started laughing, then crying, then both at once. 3 years of fear and helplessness and resigned despair came pouring out. Raith pulled her close, let her sob into his expensive shirt, his hand steady against her back. When she finally calmed, embarrassment flooded through her. "Sorry, I got your shirt wet. I have others." His voice held warmth, affection. "You're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling." Mira pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "I was so scared they'd make me go back, that the law would side with him because it usually does. I wouldn't have let that happen." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away the last of her tears. "I gave you my word." "I know." She covered his hand with hers. "I trusted you." Something shifted in his expression, an emotion too deep to name. "That's a gift I don't take lightly." They stayed like that for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Raith drew back, putting a careful distance between them. "I should take you back to the apartment," he said. "You've had a difficult day." "I have," Mira straightened, smoothing her hair. "But I'm also free for the first time in 3 years, and I don't particularly want to spend the evening alone in an apartment." Raith's eyebrow lifted. "What did you have in mind?" "I believe you requested a date." She managed a shaky smile. "I'm ready to say yes now, if the offer still stands." The smile that transformed his face was pure joy. "The offer absolutely still stands. Tonight?" "Tonight." He took her to a restaurant built into one of the old warehouse buildings along the waterfront, all exposed brick and candlelight and windows overlooking the harbor. They had a private table in a corner where they could talk without being overheard. Raith ordered wine, a vintage older than most countries, and they toasted to freedom, to justice, to new beginnings. "I've been meaning to ask," Mira said as they ate. "How old are you actually?" 312, he said it casually, as though discussing the weather. "I was turned in 1714, in what's now Romania." "That's so strange to think about. You've lived through so much history." "Most of which was tedious." He cut into his steak rare enough it was nearly raw with precise movements. "People romanticize immortality, but the reality is a lot of waiting and watching the same patterns repeat endlessly." "Sounds lonely." "It can be." His gaze met hers across the table. "But occasionally you encounter someone who makes the waiting worthwhile." Heat crept up Mira's neck. "You're very smooth for someone who hasn't dated in 300 years. "Who said I haven't dated?" His mouth curved with amusement. "I said I hadn't fallen in love. There's a difference." "Fair point." She sipped her wine, feeling pleasantly warm. "So what made me different, besides the whole chained in a cellar thing?" Raith considered the question seriously. "You didn't beg. Most people, when faced with a vampire, especially a vampire king, either grovel or panic. You did neither. You were afraid, but you looked me in the eye and answered my questions with dignity." He paused. "And when I freed you, your first instinct was to thank me, not to ask for more. That kind of grace under pressure is rare." Mira had never thought of herself as particularly graceful or dignified. She'd always felt like she was barely holding things together, one crisis away from falling apart completely. "I just did what I had to," she said. "That's what makes it impressive." He reached across the table and she met him halfway, their fingers interlacing. His skin was cool against hers, but his touch was gentle. "You're stronger than you know, Mira Lawson." They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her stories from his long life, the ridiculous ones, the funny ones, carefully editing out the darkness. She told him about her childhood, her mother who died when she was young, her complicated love for a father who meant well but caused so much damage. When the restaurant began to close, Raith walked her along the waterfront, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. The night air was cool, scented with salt and sea. "I should probably figure out what to do with my life now," Mira said, watching boats bob in the harbor. "I've spent 3 years in a holding pattern waiting for a nightmare to end. Now it has, and I have no idea what comes next." "What did you want to do before all this happened?" "Architecture." She'd almost forgotten. "I was studying architecture before I had to drop out. I loved it the way buildings could be both functional and beautiful, the way good design could change how people lived." "Then go back to school." Raith said it as though it were simple. "Finish your degree." "I can't afford—" "I can." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "Before you argue, this isn't charity. Consider it restitution. Pemberton stole 3 years of your life. Let me help you reclaim them." Pride warred with practicality in Mira's chest. She'd spent so long being dependent on others, on her father, on Pemberton through the contract. The idea of owing someone else, even someone as kind as Raith, made her uneasy. But this was different, wasn't it? This was a gift freely offered, not a chain disguised as generosity. "I'll pay you back," she said finally. "Eventually, when I'm working. If you insist." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "Though I'll note for the record that I don't expect or require repayment." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Mira marveled at how safe she felt beside him. This creature who could snap her in half without effort, who'd lived centuries and commanded an entire territory, made her feel protected rather than threatened. "Can I see you again?" Raith asked as they approached his car. On purpose this time, not just because of legal proceedings. "I'd like that," Mira smiled up at him. "Though I have to warn you, my life is going to be pretty boring now. School, studying, maybe a part-time job, no more dramatic cellar rescues. I'll try to cope with the disappointment." His expression turned serious. "Mira, I need you to understand something. I'm not human. I'll never be human. There are aspects of my life, of what I am, that can be difficult for mortals to accept. You drink blood, among other things." He didn't look away. "I'm cold to the touch. I can't go out in direct sunlight. I'm technically dead by most definitions, and I'm going to stay exactly as I am now while you age and change." "That bothers you more than it bothers me," Mira observed. "Doesn't it concern you that I could watch you grow old while I remain frozen?" She thought about it, really considered the question. "Maybe it should. But right now, all I can think is that you asked. You gave me a choice when no one else would. And you keep giving me choices. Keep treating me like my opinions and feelings matter." She squeezed his hand. "So no, it doesn't concern me. Not yet, anyway. Maybe it will later, and we'll figure it out then." Raith looked at her like she'd handed him something precious. "You're remarkable." "I'm really not. I'm just tired of being afraid." She rose on her toes, pressed a kiss to his cool cheek. "Thank you for tonight, for everything." "It was my genuine pleasure." He helped her into the car, then slid in beside her. "I'll see you safely home." They rode in comfortable silence, Mira's head resting against his shoulder, his arm around her. She felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in years. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Raith helped her re-enroll in school, pulling strings to get her accepted mid-semester. She moved out of his apartment into a small place of her own, important, she felt, to have space that was entirely hers, but he visited often, appearing with coffee or books or just his quiet company while she studied. They went on dates, real ones, where she chose to attend and chose to stay. Dinners, museums, a concert where he held her close and swayed to music written centuries after his birth. He learned her tells, the way she chewed her lip when anxious, the way she laughed when genuinely delighted. She learned his, the slight tension in his shoulders when he was worried, the way his accent strengthened when he was tired. And slowly, carefully, They built something real. 3 months after the tribunal, Mira woke to find Raith on her balcony, watching the pre-dawn sky with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're here early," she said, joining him in her robe. "Everything okay?" "I've been thinking." He didn't look at her, keeping his gaze fixed on the lightening sky. "About what I am and what you are, and what that means for us." Mira's stomach tightened. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just complicated." He finally turned to her. "I'm falling in love with you, Mira, deeply, irrevocably in love, and it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I'm going to watch you age and die unless we make a choice that I can't make for you. And I won't. I won't pressure you or manipulate you or even hint at what I might want." His hands gripped the railing. "But I need you to know that the option exists. That if you ever wanted, I could turn you, make you like me, give you immortality." The words hung in the cool morning air. Mira had considered this, of course. It was impossible to date a vampire without thinking about it. But having it spoken aloud made it real, present, something that required a response. "Would you want that?" she asked carefully. "If I chose it?" "I want you to be happy, whatever form that takes." His voice was low, intense. "If you want a human life marriage, children, growing old naturally, I'll treasure whatever time we have. If you want to join me in immortality, I would be honored beyond words. But it has to be your choice, Mira, entirely, completely yours." She moved closer, took his face in her hands. "I love you too," in case that wasn't clear. Relief flooded his features. "It's very clear. But love and eternity are different conversations." "I know." She kissed him softly, tasting the words on his cool lips. "And I'm not ready to decide yet. But I'm also not running away from the question. Can that be enough for now?" "That's more than enough." He pulled her close, and she settled against his chest, listening to the silence where a heartbeat should be. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." As the sun began to rise, Raith retreated inside, and Mira watched the dawn paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. She thought about choices, about freedom, about the difference between a decision made from fear and one made from love. The answer was already forming in her heart, but she wanted to be sure, wanted to finish school, establish her career, live as a free woman for a while before choosing to become something else. Not because she doubted Raith or their connection, but because she wanted to come to immortality from a place of strength, not escape. She wanted to choose him the way he'd chosen her, clearly, deliberately, without shadows or obligations. 6 months later, Mira stood in her cap and gown, diploma in hand, grinning at the small crowd that had come to see her graduate. Her father was there, sober for 8 months now, and trying to rebuild their relationship. Raith's advisors had come, smiling with genuine warmth, and Raith himself stood at the back, careful to stay in the shade, looking at her like she'd hung the moon. That night, he took her back to the customs house, to the same tribunal room where she'd won her freedom. "Why are we here?" she asked, confused. "Because I wanted to ask you something in the place where you became truly free." He took her hand, led her to the center of the grand hall. "Mira Lawson, would you marry me?" Her breath caught. "You want to get married?" "I want to be your partner in every way that matters. Human marriage, vampire bonding, whatever ceremony makes you happy." His dark eyes were soft with emotion. "I want to build a life with you, however long or short you choose that life to be." Tears pricked Mira's eyes. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped a ring onto her finger, a band of silver set with a stone that seemed to hold captured starlight. Then he kissed her, deep and sweet, in the place where she'd once testified to her captivity and won her freedom. "I have something else to tell you," Mira said when they finally broke apart. "I've been thinking about what you offered, about turning." Raith went very still. "And?" "I want to do it. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon." She gripped his hands, needing him to understand. "I want to be your equal in every way. I want centuries with you, not just decades. I want to design buildings that will still be standing when I'm ancient. I want immortality." She drew a breath. "But I want to choose when and how, and I want it to be a celebration, not an escape." "Tell me when," he said quietly. Just tell me when, and I'll give you everything you're asking for." They planned the wedding for the following spring and planned the turning for immediately after. Mira wanted to experience her wedding as a human, to feel her heart race when she walked down the aisle, to blush with human warmth. She worked with engineers and architects to design a chapel with special glass, expensive experimental panels that filtered UV rays while letting in natural light. A space where vampires and humans could mingle safely, where she could marry Raith at dawn instead of midnight. The night before the wedding, she stayed with Raith in his private apartments. They made love slowly, tenderly, her human warmth against his vampire cool, and she memorized the feeling of her heartbeat sinking with his absence of one. "Any regrets?" he asked afterward, holding her close. "Not a single one." She traced patterns on his chest. "This is my choice. You're my choice. And tomorrow, I'll choose you again in front of everyone we know. I'll spend eternity trying to be worthy of that choice. You already are." The wedding took place at dawn, light streaming through the UV safe glass Mira had designed. She wore a dress she'd chosen herself, simple and elegant, nothing like the prison of white satin from 3 years ago. Her father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. Raith waited at the altar in morning light, white-haired and beautiful, and looking at her like she was his entire world. They spoke vows they'd written themselves, promising partnership and respect and love through whatever came. When Raith kissed her, his lips warming slightly against hers in the filtered sunlight, the gathered crowd, human and vampire, both erupted in applause. The reception lasted until evening, when the sun finally set, and they could move to the second ceremony. This one was older, performed in the ancient vampire tradition with Cassia officiating. Mira knelt before Raith in the tribunal hall, now decorated with flowers and candles, and tilted her head to expose her throat. "This is your last chance to change your mind," Raith said softly, for her ears alone. "I'll love you either way." "I'm not changing my mind." She met his eyes. "Make me yours. Make me immortal. Make me your equal in every way." His fangs descended, elegant and sharp, and he struck quickly, mercifully. The pain was brief, overwhelmed almost immediately by a rush of pleasure and connection. She felt his venom entering her bloodstream, felt her human heart begin to slow and change. He cradled her as her body transformed, whispering reassurances in languages older than English. The process took hours, her metabolism shifting, her senses sharpening, her heartbeat fading to silence. When she finally opened her eyes again, everything was different. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer. She could hear conversations happening blocks away, could smell the ocean though they were inland. And Raith looked even more beautiful, every detail of his face crystalline and perfect. "How do you feel?" he asked. She took inventory. "Stronger, faster, immortal." "Powerful," she said, and her voice resonated differently. "Like I could take on the world." "You could." He helped her to her feet. "You're young still, newly turned. It'll take time to master your abilities, but you're mine now, and I'm yours, in every way that matters." Mira looked at her reflection in a darkened window. Pale skin, hair that seemed to gleam with its own light, eyes that held new depth. She looked like a vampire, like she belonged in Raith's world. "I need to test something," she said. "What?" "The glass I designed." She walked toward the exit, toward where dawn was beginning to break. Raith followed, worried, but she'd done the calculations 100 times. The filtered light hit her skin, and instead of burning, it merely tingled. Warm, but not painful. The UV glass worked, letting her stand in sunrise as a vampire, something that should have been impossible. "I can walk in daylight," she breathed. "We both can with this glass." Raith stared at the light touching his own skin, wonder crossing his face. "You've changed everything. Vampires haven't seen sunrise in millennia. I wanted to make something beautiful, something that would last." She turned to him, taking his hands. "We have forever now. Let's use it well." They stood together in the filtered dawn, newly married and newly matched, ready to face centuries of tomorrows. 10 years passed in what felt like heartbeats. Mira established herself as an architect specializing in UV safe structures, revolutionizing how vampires interacted with the world. She designed buildings that let the immortal walk in daylight, that brought sun to creatures who'd lived in shadow for thousands of years. Raith ruled his territory with wisdom and fierce protection, with Mira at his side as queen and equal partner. Together they reformed the old laws, outlawed marriage contracts purchased through debt, created systems to protect the vulnerable. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the balcony of their home, a building Mira had designed herself, with glass walls that let in the dawn. "Do you ever regret it?" Raith asked, his arm around her waist. "Giving up mortality?" Mira leaned into him, watching the sun rise over the city they'd helped transform. "Not for a second. This life, with you, is everything I chose, everything I wanted." She turned in his arms, kissed him as golden light spilled across them both. "You freed me from chains and gave me the world. How could I regret that?" "I love you," he said simply. "For all of time." "For all of time," she echoed, and meant it with every fiber of her immortal being. They had centuries ahead of them, unlimited dawns to witness together, countless buildings to design, and kingdoms to guide. But in that moment, standing in impossible sunlight, they had everything they needed. Each other, freely chosen, deeply loved, and unshakably together. It was enough. It was everything.